turn this over to John Plecnik. He is our commissioner.
Woo-hoo, yeah.
Thank you so much to our East Lake City Councilman, our Lake County Treasurer-elect Mike Zurin. I want to say it's exciting to be at the first in-person Connections meal because I saw how your church soldiered through last year as Christian soldiers. Mm-hmm. You didn't stop serving the community just because the government said, here are the new restrictions. You worked through them. You found a way to still do God's work. Mm-hmm. And one thing I'm terrible at doing is saying no. And I will tell you, one thing Mike is very good at doing is asking for people to help.
He is.
Because your church is very outward looking. And Mike is an embodiment of that.
He is.
He looked outward and he asked for help to serve. And so I got to see firsthand, doing a little bit of volunteering with all of you, just how caring your church is. So it's wonderful to see God bless you by letting you come back together again. And I'm excited to be a small part of that. But tonight, this evening, Mike asked me if I could give a speech on patriotism, if I could talk a little bit about the founding of our country, because this weekend, that's what we're called to do. And I think it's important as we stand here together in one nation under God, that we remember the truth of our nation's founding. July 4th, 1776, people weren't shy about saying why they did what they did. They weren't shy about saying that they had faith in God and that God was their deliverance, not just in the next life, but here and now.
That's good.
That they followed God to the determination that even though a revolution against the most powerful country in the world, the real superpower of their time, that it was the right thing to do, to pledge their names, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the cause of a free America. And that's why we're free today. But I do know that when we look back in history, it can be a little intimidating, right? You see George Washington, you see Benjamin Franklin, you see Thomas Jefferson, and you say, I want to do good things. I want to make a difference, but realistically, could I ever be anything like them? Whether I was born then or born today, how could I be so great? But there was a small fact shared with me, and I do mean a very small fact, that completely changed my view of our founding fathers and mothers. Go back to 1776. You know how many people lived in the United States back then? Rough number? A little more than that. 2.5 million people. Now in Ohio, we've got between 11 and 12 million people a day. More than 4 times the people live in Ohio today than in the entire America, United States of America back then. So when we talk about George Washington, when we talk about Thomas Jefferson inspiring their colleagues and their patriots to come out and resist, they weren't convincing hundreds of millions of people. They couldn't even imagine a country this big centuries later. They convinced their neighbors to step up and do the right thing. And while I know that one of us can't change hundreds of millions of minds, or change a whole country or a world filled with billions of people, those folks that we look back at and say, wow, they didn't change the minds of hundreds of millions of people. They didn't lead an army of millions. They led an army of thousands of their neighbors to free a few million people in a place with a smaller population than 1/4 of Ohio. Now, this isn't me belittling what they did. They planted a seed, a very small seed that grew into the country where we live today. The Bible teaches us that if we have faith the size of a mustard seed, we can move mountains.
That's good.
Well, the founding fathers had that faith and planted that seed, and a mountain grew up from one shore of a continent to another. But at the time, they were a backwater little bird on the wrong side of the planet that no one cared about. Today, today we go to the halls of Congress and we see the fresco on top of the Capitol building where George Washington is portrayed as Zeus and the other founding fathers as Greek gods. It was designed to intimidate the royal families of Europe. And it intimidates. It does. You look up and you say, wow, I could never be like that godlike creature. But we're all made in the image of God.
Yes.
And we can all do great things if we have faith that God will use us, if we open our hearts to Him to do things far beyond what a human being can do. And while George Washington never lived to see, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, never lived to see the incredible nation that they founded. Very few of us get to see how tall the tree grows when we plant the seed. So I want to start by saying that even though it's intimidating to look back, and we almost deify the founding fathers because of what a great nation we live in under God. They were just human beings like us who believed in God and had faith that they were called to do something great. We can plant the seed today that can grow to be even bigger.
That's good.
If we have faith in God. So don't say it's not possible. I also know in these times, in the middle of COVID, economic turmoil, political turmoil, many of us ask, can we fix the problems of this day and age? Has America seen its best days come and go? And I've had many people say to me, John, I think you're a pretty good man. I think I'm a pretty strong person, but look how small we are. We can't change this. We can't fix this. We're too small. I said, yeah, we are too small. Let me ask you this. Is God big enough to fix the problems of today? Every person in Ohio, which is more than four times as many people as that fledgling United States. It's not enough to change the problems of the world. But we're not called to do it alone. We're called to be a part of God's greater plan. And if we open our hearts to that and have faith, we can do as great. We can do greater things than even George Washington and the founding fathers.
Amen.
And we shouldn't be afraid to say whose back we have and who has our back. The Bible teaches us that everyone, no matter how weak, no matter how sinful, who says Jesus Christ is Lord, says so through the words of the Holy Spirit. I'm a sinner, not perfect, and no one in this room is. I'm probably the worst. That's what they say about politicians. But even the worst person in the entire world who says Jesus Christ is Lord is inspired by the Holy Spirit
That's
of God.
right. That's right.
And that's what we need to remember.
That's good.
The worst person in the world can plant a seed that can become something great. None of us are helpless in that regard.
Good.
And I want to show something from the distant past in Europe that inspires me. I want to share a story with you. In a small, can't even say country, small duchy, a dukedom, called Carinthia. There was once a tradition that took place with an old Roman pillar. It was collapsed from a building that somebody built that nobody even remembered the purpose of. But in this little dukedom, whenever a new duke was appointed, he had to walk up to that pillar, and a peasant stood before him and said, "I'm your boss," and smacked him in the face. And the would-be duke had to stand there and take it and say, "You are my boss. I'm only here to serve you." And with that said, he was allowed to sit on the pillar and be crowned duke. Because in Carinthia, they wanted their leader to know that power comes from the people. That they only rule with the assent of the governed, because each of us has a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness given by God. And the only people who have a right to tell us what to do are those who we choose and trust to be a leader. And they need to be reminded, even with a smack upside the head sometimes, that ultimately all authority comes from God, that free will is given to each individual person, and those who lead only can morally lead with the assent of the government. Now you might say this is an odd little tradition, a good one, but an odd little tradition in the middle of nowhere. Well, Corinthia ultimately became Slovenia. And history books were written about this little dukedom and how they have this backwards policy of saying that it's not the government who's in charge, it's the people who's in charge. Well, you know who read that little old archaic history book? Who read about that little old archaic practice? Who read about how power doesn't come from the government, but from the free will of the people? It's a name you recognize. I've said it at least 7 times today. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson. In the halls of Congress, the Library of Congress, Thomas Jefferson's personal copy of this history book still stands, with his notes saying, yes, power comes from the people. And so we know that those folks in Corinthia, a tiny little dukedom, who stood up and said, no, 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 you don't rule just because you're born to someone. Just because the government says so. You only can morally rule if the people choose you. They never thought that their little practice, their custom would inspire a man on another continent hundreds of years later to say that this is one nation under God and the power stands with the people. But they did. And they never knew that even as they were fighting for a better life for their families, more freedom for their people, that they would inspire a country, the greatest country in the world, in the history of the world. So I want you to think about what seeds you're planting now at Willow Praise Church, in Willowick, in Lake County, in Ohio, because even though you could say Ohio is such a small place, Ohio is more than 4 times bigger than what was the United States for the first July 4th and the first Independence Day. God helped George Washington, but God's here helping us too. And as I look at this crowd, I see a lot of patriots, a lot of people who didn't stay at home or bemoan how difficult life was for them. You put that to the side to serve your community. So, as your Lake County Commissioner, with a very hard to pronounce name, John Plecnik. Yes, Plecnik is a Slovenian name.
Yes.
Which is why I'm so proud of how Slovenia had a small role and planted a small seed to help the United States be free. I want you to know that your county is grateful to you. Because I can tell you that other counties did not step up the same way Lake did to feed the hungry, to serve those in need. And people ask, why? How does your county do this? You know, what law did you pass? No. It's not our law. It's God's law that you followed in caring so much about your neighbors. I have to say, I am humbled to be standing here with your pastors. Pastor Bogerneff, Pastor Myrtle.
Murtis.
Merges.
Yes.
With Mike Zurin.
Yes.
With Faina, Faina, I can't pronounce your last name.
Faina.
Faina.
Yeah.
With you. I'm honored to be here with you because you're everywhere volunteers. I want you to know that it goes not unnoticed but very noticed, and that Lake County is grateful that we treated each other like family, friends, and neighbors, not as strangers, and so much of that started here in Willow Praise Church. So, you've planted many seeds, and we will not see all of them grow to their fruition in our lifetimes. Many of these trees will not grow to their full size until we pass on, but you have done things that won't just help you, won't just help your children, but will help your children's children's children. Because you believed in God, you cared about your neighbor, and you put them before yourself. So, I want to say thank you for sharing the moment on this July 4th. Thank you for coming together as a community. Thank you for caring about your neighbors. And I hope that I'll see each and every one of you many, many more times as you volunteer and work to do good things. America is free because of so many people. The veterans in this room, the volunteers who
Yes.
serve the best parts of this country. And I know we'll continue to be free, not because we're big, we're strong, we're tough, we're rich, we're powerful. The founding fathers weren't. But they had faith in God, and so do we.
Yes.
And God will bless this nation.
Amen. Very good. Very good.
Give him another round. Say amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Jesus. We thank Jesus for allowing him to come and speak to us.